Hello, and welcome to Building High Performance Cultures, a weekly series where we talk to executives from top organizations about how they've built high performance cultures and how they're leveraging their cultures as competitive advantage. I'm Marty Parker, the President and CEO of Waterstone Human Capital. And my guest today is none other than the CEO of Canuck Place Children's Hospice, Margaret McNeil. Margaret, welcome to Building High Performance Cultures.
Thank you so much, Marty.
It's great to have you. A little bit about Margaret. Margaret has dedicated her professional career to the care of vulnerable populations. How is that for dedication and commitment? And during her 8-year tenure at Canuck Place, she led the organization through significant and positive growth and change, including a strategic fundraising shift, rebranding, and developing and growing a talented and engaged team. And get this, her leadership has resulted in a 100% increase in revenue to support needed complex care for children with life-threatening illnesses and families from across BC and the Yukon. With the impact of COVID-19 affecting the organizations at all levels earlier this year, Margaret spearheaded the team to shift their care model to increase virtual and in-home care for vulnerable children and families, redirect the fundraising and marketing initiatives, and support staff and volunteers through the pandemic. And as a result, children and families have more care options, the reach to donors has increased, and the organization has continued to sustain all service levels through the pandemic, which is incredible. Committed to thought leadership, Margaret promoted research and teaching from staff physicians and clinicians, helping to position Canuck Place as a global recognized leader in pediatric palliative care. Now, previously, Margaret held senior roles with BC Housing, Vancouver Island Health Authority, and a variety of other positions in policy and delivery in various aspects of health, including home and community care. And in 2017, Margaret received the CEO of the Year from Business in Vancouver in the non-for-profit category. And most recently, in 2020, she was named as Canada's Most Admired CEO in the broader public sector category. Now, Margaret, that's a list of accomplishments and achievements beyond most. Tell us a little bit, though, for those who may not be familiar with Canuck Place Children's Hospice, about the organization, but also about the culture you've built there.
Thanks, Marty, and I'm very humbled by those comments. Thank you so much. As you said, Canuck Place is BC and Yukon's pediatric palliative care provider. And we look after every year over 818 children with life-threatening illnesses and their families. And we do that in a number of ways. We do it through our hospices. We have 2. We also do it through a very wide range of community services that includes in-home care, in community care, and in hospital care. So we really want to expand our reach to where children and families need the care most and what's important to receiving the care at any time. We're one of 6 in Canada. We were the 6th in the world when we opened in 1995. And now, 25 years later, we are celebrating a wonderful milestone in the evolution of the organization. I would like to speak a little bit about what pediatric palliative care is, because I think that's important to this discussion. A lot of people think about palliative care in really having a focus on the last part of life, the last few months of life. And pediatric palliative care has a very different focus. We know kids and families from the time they're first diagnosed with a life-threatening condition until they either die or turn age 19. And by and large, we do see some children who do graduate from the program, but by and large, the kids are not expected to live to age 19. And the diagnoses and conditions that we look after are very, very broad, over 190 different conditions, most of which the average person has never heard of because they're metabolic conditions or they're diseases of conditions of the nervous system or very complicated cardiac conditions that the average person doesn't know about. If they were, they would be familiar with them, but Canuck Place really specializes in these very rare conditions. And while we know the end of the journey, we don't know what trajectory that journey is going to take. And what Canuck Place is here to do is really support and care for those families during that journey. The average length of time we know a child is 7 years. And we look after them wherever they are. They don't spend most of their life in in the hospices. They spend most of their life at home, and they're heavy care for the families. And then after the child dies, then we usually support the families for on average about 3 years in a bereavement. So we have very, very long relationships with both the children and their families in the provision of this care.
Margaret, we know also that you've done something beyond the business of Canuck Place, and that is you've built and sustained an exceptional corporate culture at Canuck Place. And I'm curious to know, as the CEO, what's been your role in sustaining that culture?
Well, I'm going to start actually before me. Canuck Place started with the vision of a pediatric oncology nurse. And she really believed in the fact that the way children were dying in hospital was not the way that they should be. And so it was really her vision that supporters signed on to, in the belief of a vision of a holistic, family-centered model of care. And that really sustains us today. So when I came to the organization, I inherited this incredible culture of exceptional clinical care. And that has always been the foundation of Canuck Place. But there were some holes in the organization when I joined it, because to me, in building a sustaining culture, you need to do two things. One is you have to be absolutely intentional about it. If you're not intentional, it's not going to happen. And the other thing you have to be is incredibly curious, because that curiosity allows leaders to engage with their staff and with their donors and with their families to find out what's important to them. And I think it's only through that curiosity, and then refining that curiosity to really call out the culture for what it is and build it. And also the other part of that is really helping people see what their role is in building and sustaining that culture. Every person at Canuck Place is here because they believe in the mission and the values of what Canuck Place does for kids and families, and also for each other. We very much have a strong family culture, but I think being open to the feedback, their ideas about culture, looking for the opportunities and acting on them, because staff and volunteers need to see leadership in action around culture. And if you're not intentional about it, it's not going to happen. You also have to say thank you. The tone is set from the top. And if staff and volunteers see leaders acting in an inauthentic way, there's absolutely no way that you can build and sustain culture. It needs to be believed and lived and demonstrated in everything from job descriptions to competencies to celebrating with staff to finding ways to really acknowledge the positive culture that we had. Success builds success. And so you really do have to be intentional about it. I also think as leaders, what we do is we check in with our key decisions and make sure that they align with our values and they align with our culture. And it's humbling to do that kind of check-in and be deliberate about it, because then when we're taking that decision to staff, then we can be clear that it was the culture and our values that really helped us come to that decision.
Margaret, I know you've done a lot of work on culture. In many ways, it's been the focal point of your work. And the results are obvious. But when you joined the organization in 2012, I know you did a lot of work around kind of the repositioning, strategic planning that led to significant changes to the fundraising and government relations kind of functions and activities in the organization. What did those changes not only mean to the business, but to the culture of Canuck Place?
Well, I'll start with where we were in 2012. And again, I did inherit this very strong culture of clinical excellence. And that is an incredible place to start, because that is so important to our brand and to our donors. But the very first thing that I really needed to take a look at was alignment around the leadership table. The organization was quite siloed. And while clinically we were strong, there wasn't alignment among the leadership team as to what sort of culture we wanted and what were the values of the organization. So that was a big piece of work that needed to be done in order to make sure that that alignment was there. Because without that, a fundraiser or a cook or one of our maintenance staff can't see how they contribute to the culture of the organization. We also found that in our fundraising department, there was no alignment within the department. So we did a fundraising audit, and that fundraising audit early on really helped us look at opportunities. And I'm very grateful that the board, based on that audit, was willing to invest in some key positions at a pivotal time in the organization. And since then, since that audit, we've really built a very strong integrated private fundraising strategy that has been critical to being able to raise the additional funds that we have needed to grow the organization. And at the time, we were in the process of building a second hospice that didn't have any operating plan associated with it either. And so while we had the capital, we didn't have the operating funds to go along with it. So that the integrated private fundraising strategy and the alignment with our donors and stewardship around what we do and what our values are and telling family stories was so critical. But we also had to be very intentional about our government relations strategy. We get about 40% of our funding on an annual basis from government and about 60% from the private sector. And in order to make our second building successful, and government had invested capital in that new building, it was in their interest also to see that a second building get built and to see it be successful. So with both a very intentional GR strategy and a very intentional and integrated fundraising strategy that includes marketing and communications, we were able to build that. But again, the start really was at the leadership table. And then we built it out from there and then cascaded it down to the rest of the organization.
So it's it really is a fantastic story, and not one that, happens quickly. These things take time. But you mentioned earlier checking in on the values, and I know that Canuck Place is truly a values-based organization. What does that mean at Canuck Place and to you, Margaret? And how is it an important differentiator when you're attracting and retaining key talent?
I love that question, Marty, because people say, so what's different about Canuck Place? What makes it special? And we've all had experiences receiving care in our care system, and I'm incredibly grateful for that, particularly in time of COVID-19. But so much of what Canuck Place does is not about the what we do, but how we do it. And what our staff all know is that every interaction with a family matters. It doesn't matter if it's a cook who is serving a family at a dinner time. It doesn't matter if it's a housekeeper who's there looking after the family room. It doesn't matter if it's a nurse or one of our fundraisers who is engaging with a donor. It's how that work is done, which is absolutely critical. And that's our big differentiator, I think, is the how. Because at the center of everything that we do is care for the child and their family. And it's the little moments that truly make a difference. I was talking to one of our new cooks the other day, and he was so excited. He said, the family really likes my food. And I said, well, you make really great food. It's fantastic. And he said, yeah, my mom taught me to cook. And he said, but they like my food so much, I thought I would ask them what kind of snacks that they like. So I made their favorite snacks. And the fact that a family who is staying at one of our hospices, they're exhausted. They probably haven't slept very well. Their kids need 24/7 care, whether they're in for medical respite, pain and symptom management, or end of life care. these families live with incredible circumstances that none of us can really imagine. And to have somebody take the time to say, I care by making your favorite snacks. I care because you're having a really tough day. What can I do to help you and support you? All of that is absolutely critical. And so that culture of engagement with values is so critical. We built the values with our staff. So we went through a process a few years ago to refresh them. And we engaged all staff in that exercise so that all staff have the ability to see themselves, not only in the mission of the organization, but in how their role contributes to making us successful. And also in us, from an HR perspective, in trying to describe the behaviors that support those values. Because if we can describe the behaviors that support those values, then staff can understand them. Because it's easy to look at words on a page, but to really live them and create the opportunities for people to live them, and also to create the supports within the organization to allow them to live is equally important. And those values apply as much to the care that we deliver as to how we look after and steward our donors, to how staff and volunteers look after each other. It's just embedded and infused in every part of what we do.
It's interesting you use the turn of phrase, seeing yourself in the values. And that's a great segue to my next question, which is, how do purpose and culture overlap at Canuck Place?
Well, I say that organizational values are shaped by the culture, and culture is really an expression of the values. And as leaders, we have to make sure that both of those are aligned, because if culture and values aren't aligned, it's not authentic, and people don't see it that. And I think staff engaged in the values of the organization, and when they can see the role that they play and how those values get expressed, it really becomes seamless. There is nobody who works at Canuck Place. Not that everybody can work here. It is a challenging place to work, given that we know that loss is part of what we deal with. But we also deal with love, and we also deal with joy, and we also look for those moments that are so critical for families in helping them see the little moments in their child's life that do bring joy. And from a staff perspective, we also do that. So those issues around caring and compassion, teamwork, accountability, quality and safety, and embracing life are so critical, both to our staff, our volunteers, our donors, and also to our families. And we have to be authentic about that.
So often, Margaret, when we talk about culture, it's related to the internal team in an organization, how they exemplify the culture and the brand. But I would say that's not only different maybe in the not-for-profit sector, but also in healthcare, where you have such diversity in the number and type of stakeholders that you need to buy into your culture. And I know you've done an exceptional job of this. So talk a little bit about kind of the role of the other non-internal stakeholders and how you cascade your culture to your board, to your volunteers, to your donors.
I think, Marty, at the heart of it is a storytelling. And it's storytelling because in many ways it's very hard to communicate what the impact is on a family if they're part of Canuck Place, and they're always part of Canuck Place, whether their child has passed away or whether they're still on the program. We have a huge sense of belonging around that. But to earn the trust of stakeholders, it's not different than any other industry. You still have to communicate the impact and the value of what you do. But I think that donors need to see how that care is special enough for them to make the investment in our organization. And I think storytelling is the key. So our families often want to find ways to give back. And if they can be engaged in that storytelling, we use that in our newsletters, we use it as in our galas, we use it in our various events these days. They are virtual, but we always have a family speaker, because the power of it is no more meaningful than if it comes from the person who actually received that care. And I think storytelling is absolutely a key. It's backed up with a data. Obviously, there are some people who really want to know what the data show, it's really storytelling that is at the heart of it.
Margaret, when I recently spoke to one of our other Canada's Most Admired CEO winners, Carolyn Riseborough, who won last year, and who is the CEO of Trillium Health Partners Foundation, I asked her about some of the misconceptions that people have about working in the not-for-profit or the broader public sector. And she said the one that comes across most often is that people think that moving into the public sector is a way to slow down. And you've spent, let's just say, an ample amount of years in the category. And we know that's definitely not the case. But what are some of the other, misconceptions about leadership in the broader public sector that you've come across in your time leading in the sector?
One of the things that I'm very aware of is that I think people understand the role of the public sector, they understand the role of the private sector, but a lot of people really don't understand the scale and impact of the nonprofit sector. And, they say people work there, because it's a labor of love. It's, that people don't need to be compensated in the same way. And that is, to me, a false measure. In BC, for example, charities and nonprofits employ about 86,000 people in this province, and they contribute about over 6 billion to BC's GDP on an annual basis. And that kind of impact, I think, is not known. And so I think for me, one of the misconceptions is that it is, supported by a government, or it's supported by philanthropy. But it really needs, in my mind, to be seen as an equal partner, because of what the nonprofit sector does and the range of areas that it is involved in, from animal welfare to housing to food security, education, healthcare, social services, the FACE sector. It's everywhere within our organization, and I think is a critical contributor to us having a civil society. And there's a national group called Imagine Canada that is working very closely with the federal government, really, so that the nonprofit and charitable sector can be seen as an equal partner. We have a lens because we are so close to what is happening to the various groups that we serve within the organization about what is important, and to be able to contribute to public policy in that way, I think, is a huge opportunity for the nonprofit to be playing a bigger role in that venue and be it as an equal partner. We're also incredibly nimble and very responsive. When COVID-19 hit, who did you hear about? You heard about the food banks. You heard about the Salvation Army. You heard about all of the nonprofits that just went into action because we have that ability to be nimble. Government was all obviously key in providing a wage subsidy, but in terms of mental health support, in terms of housing support, in terms of who's going to look after, the animals in the SPCA, like things that really are so important to our lives. COVID-19 it doesn't change the fact that any of those things happen, but we have the ability to be nimble and responsive and change our method of delivery to meet that. And I think that's a piece that people don't know and realize about the nonprofit sector, along with the incredible impact and contribution that we make.
What do you see as critical to the future of aligning your people to your culture, as well as attracting new talent to your own high performance culture at Canuck Place?
I think the qualities of successful leadership are really timeless. I think people look for clarity of a vision. They look for authenticity. And if leadership is not seen as being authentic and aligned, it is able to be picked up very, very quickly. So we have to make sure also that there's really good staff engagement. I don't make the organization successful. The 200 people who work here and the 400 volunteers make the organization successful. So staff engagement to me is absolutely critical, because I think that that leads to connectivity. So both individuals and teams can form a more direct connection and break down barriers, and also be able to see themselves in their part of the success of the organization. And I think that resonates with everyone, and it also spills over then to our relationship with our donors and with our key partners. Because if we're acting with openness, transparency, about the things that go well and the things that don't go well, to pretend that staff don't know when something hasn't gone right, we're all fooling ourselves a little bit. So I think, you just speak to it openly, honestly. It's not about what happened, it's what you do about what happened. And do that with transparency, and whether it's a town hall meeting, whether it's written communication, whether it's within teams, whether it's an informal conversation that you're having, it all needs to resonate and it all needs to be aligned.
Yeah, well, I couldn't agree with you more. There's so many of what you just talked about is what we spend lots of time and energy training leaders in terms of clarity of vision and authenticity and creating an environment of safety, all those kinds of things that actually make a difference. And as you said, I think people know sometimes before the leaders do. I think they're more equipped and they know the right way to handle it oftentimes as well.
Yes.
As you look out, Margaret, what trends do you see coming in terms of building high performance cultures?
Well, I think the things that we've been talking about, Marty, are exactly those ones. I think leading with transparency, authenticity, connectivity, and clarity of vision are absolutely clear. I also think that alignment piece, like people need to feel aligned and see the alignment that their leaders have within the organization, and also they need to see the alignment across the organization. In terms of the values and the work and how it is being done. We now call it 4 different locations. We have 2 physical hospices. We have another office that handles our fundraising, finance, IT, people and culture departments. And every part of them operate a little bit differently, and well, they should, because they have different functions. But we actually did a culture audit a few years ago, and we had it led by one of our managers. It wasn't led by leadership, it was led by one of our managers. And we looked for those big areas of commonality. And we also looked where there were differences, and had to have some discussion about whether or not the differences were material or they weren't material. Knowing that and our 4th location is remote, forgot about that one. But a very important one right now. But once we did that culture audit, it really allowed us as a leadership team to say, so if we want to do things that really reinforce the culture, what are going to be those things? And we consulted with staff about what was going to be meaningful in investing in our culture. Because if leaders don't make it intentional that they're investing in culture to their staff and to the volunteers, then I think that's another critical aspect that leaders need to be doing.
Well, we saw the biggest 3 trends this year by far and away, and they spoke loud and clear to us through our Canada's Most Admired submission interviews, were that organizations are really committed to working on their culture. It's kind of like personal health these days, right? That whether it's where they want it to be or not, they're focused on intentionally, as you say, working on it. Secondly, was the development of their people, clearly as people and professionals. And thirdly was creating an environment of safety and trust.
Yeah.
And with those 3 things, really anything was possible. And one final question for you, Margaret, and that is, if you're giving one piece of advice to someone say, looking to start their high performance leadership team culture journey at an organization, be it in the broader public sector, the not-for-profit sector, the private sector, no matter, entrepreneurial, what would you share with them?
I think where I would start is expressing gratitude. People come to work. They spend a lot of time here. They all have families. A lot of people are working from home now. That's creating a lot of challenges for people. We're finding that our staff are needing a lot more support from their managers just because of the challenges of working from home. But regardless of that, it's expressing gratitude and saying thank you for what they do. And I think that also gives the opportunity for them to talk about what they're proud about. And it also gives us as leaders the opportunity to say to talk about how that aligns with what the mission is and for the organization, so that again, they can see their part and how what they are doing is contributing to the success of the organization. And I think that gratitude piece can't be underestimated. When someone says thank you, and not just says thank you, but thank you because you did a really great job in, I'll take our receptionist, for example, in connecting with that family when they walked in the doors for the first time. Because walking in the doors of Canuck Place is a very hard thing to do. And I said, and it doesn't matter who it is. Say, gee, you just did an amazing job of welcoming them, before the nurse came down to greet them. So if they can see what sort of behaviors they are and be thanked for what they do, that goes a heck of a long way to build an incredible culture. Of course, there needs to be a little bit of course correction from time to time, but the big thing is just to be grateful and to be thankful that we have incredible people working in our organization who really, really want to make a difference in the lives of kids and families.
Margaret, that's great counsel. And I think if we kind of sum it up today, and something I love, which is seeing yourself in the values and seeing how intentional, great leaders can be in terms of focusing on their culture, how it can be manifested and represented through storytelling and with the kind of behavioral attributes of transparency and authenticity. But you also talked about resilience, grit, and being nimble. And I think what's clear, not just through what we've learned for those people who are following along today and who have not met you before, but what's clear is that you represent all of these qualities and have for some time. And that is, although you inherited something pretty special, I think you made it great. And to all the great work, all the families that you have impacted across these many years, thank you. And thank you for just investing just a little bit of time back into Canada's most admired cultures and today's Building High Performance Cultures block.
It's been an honor, Marty. Thank you so much. I feel very privileged. Thank you.
So thank you again to our guest today, Margaret McNeil, the CEO at Canuck Place Children's Hospice. And join us next week for another episode of Building High Performance Cultures. In the meantime, if you want to learn more about the topic, please visit waterstonehc.com.